Good evening, everyone. This is the sixth and for now the last webinar in this series, Polish Talk Mondays with Jewish Historical Institute, which is a cooperation between Moreshet, Mordechai Anielewicz Memorial Education and Research Center, the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, and the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. This evening, we are hosting Alicja Mroczkowska. We will have 45 minutes of discussion with presentation and then approximately 15 minutes for questions from the audience. When we'll get to the question session, please submit your questions via the Q&A button on your screen and not via the chat. But before we'll start, I would like to invite the directors of the institutions who are part of this project to say a few words. So we'll start with you, Acting Director of the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, Ms. Katarzyna Jezewska.
Yes, well done, Noam. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As an Acting Director of the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, I'd like to thank you, all our partners, for a truly wonderful cooperation. Mr. Yakov Asher, the director of the Moreshet Mordechai Anielewicz Memorial Holocaust Study and Research Center, the irreplaceable Noam Leibman, who coordinated and successfully conducted all the webinars, and of course to Mrs. Monika Krawczyk, the director of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, and her dedicated staff for the truly engaging introduction to the work of the Institute. And of course, Julia Mackiewicz from Polish Institute, who connected us all. So thank you. Monday evenings with you were always very inspiring. And of course, special thanks also go to our audience, whose involvement and interest we really, truly appreciate. And I'm very pleased to mention that over time, the audience of our webinars grew in numbers with each meeting. So well done, everyone. Thank you for your feedbacks. Thank you for your opinion and your comments. It's always very important for us to hear from you. It also made us understand that this is the direction the Polish Institute, with our mission here in Israel, should head towards. Throughout the whole series, we have introduced the richness of the Jewish history and the Jewish heritage in Poland to, among others, present how the Poles maintain the legacy of the Jewish culture and the Jewish presence in Poland in many fields, such as research, family, genealogy, educational projects. Just not to take too much time, I will just mention that all the webinars that we are having here on Zoom, we record them, we will put the Hebrew subtitles, and they will be available on our YouTube channel or Polish Institute YouTube channel. So we are always very welcome to watch it again, to send it to other people that couldn't join us in the evenings. So there is always a way to remind yourselves what we were talking about here. So enjoy the last episode, and hope to see you soon with a new program. So thank you again, all of you.
Thank you very much, Katarzyna. And now, please, Director of Moreshet, Mr. Yaakov Asher.
Good evening and shalom from Moreshet. I would like to thank Ms. Katarzyna Jezewska, the Acting Director of the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, and Mrs. Monika Krawczyk, the Director of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, for enabling this cooperation between the Polish Institute, the JHI, and Moreshet. We strongly believe that forming a partnership between our organization in many possible ways help us to learn and explore the past, thus improving our present and shaping a better future for all mankind. I want to thank you, our devoted audience, for being with us and for taking part in this series of lectures. I do hope that we continue this partnership, and I look forward to see all of you with us in future meetings. And last but not least, I want to thank our education department manager, Mr. Noam Leibman, for being part of the team that planned and conducted this great series. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, Yaakov. And before we'll start the lecture, a few words from Director of Jewish Historical Institute, Ms. Monica Kravchik. Thank you, Monica.
Shalom lekulam, and it's a pleasure and honor to be here and joining everyone. And I'm very happy that we can form this special partnership between Moreshet Anielewicz and Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, and also us joining from and connecting from Warsaw, Poland. It's extremely great to be here with everybody and to contribute to such important project that is sharing information and education and the most humanitarian values that are so dear to us. And I believe that this is only the beginning of our great cooperation and spreading more and more information. And most important, cherishing the result of this project, which is friendship and understanding and coming to the table together and trying to understand how the history was shaped and how we can improve it and for the best purposes. And hopefully we will be able to meet in person very soon as then we get all vaccinated and the pandemic would hopefully end, and we'll share these special moments in person. But we are also grateful for the technology connecting us and maybe doing something and contributing to things that were not imaginable in the past. So I would like to thank very, very much our partners and our audience, and we are looking for more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica, very much. And now to our lecturer, who did a lot. Alicja Mroczkowska is a sociocultural anthropologist, a PhD candidate at Warsaw University, graduate of the Institute of Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology at the University of Warsaw, where she taught classes about Jewish heritage. She also holds a postgraduate degree from the Faculty of Architecture at Warsaw University of Technology. Currently, she is Deputy Head of the Heritage Documentation Department at the Jewish Historical Institute, a specialist in documentation, preservation, and commemoration of Jewish heritage in Poland. Cultural anthropologist in heritage and memory studies. She is the co-founder of Voluntary Task Force for Preservation of the Jewish Cemetery in Warsaw and of the Foundation for Documentation of Jewish Cemeteries in Poland. In addition, previously she has coordinated the research grant, research and documentation of Jewish war graves and killing sites in Northeast Poland, founded by Claims Conference. Good evening, Alicja. Thank you for joining us. And I'll start with the question, if you could describe your work at Jewish Historical Institute, what does your field or department exactly deal with, and how this field was developed in Jewish Historical Institute?
A very good question, very wide question. First of all, of course, thank you for inviting me to participate in this meeting. It's a great honor. So, of course, the field itself is documenting, preserving, protecting, and commemorating Jewish cemeteries in Poland. But our department, called Heritage Documentation, actually deals with a much wider range of aspects. And maybe to understand also the history of the field, as well as our work, I will tell you a little bit of how it all started. Actually, our department was founded as a direct answer to the needs of the times. And this was the beginning of the 1990s. And this was following a decade where a lot was going on and a lot of research and activity even though it was still the end of the communist era, a lot was going on. And there was especially one man, recently departed, unfortunately, Jan Jagielski, who was one of the main authorities in the field. And all throughout the 1980s, he came to the Institute. He researched the photographs, which were just sort of lying there forgotten. He researched the archives, all to just find out what is actually out there and what has survived. And also more and more people started writing to the Institute as knowing that this is a center where he also worked and functioned. And at the beginning of the 1990s, the department was established, and very soon it became the center for 3 main activities. And one of them will be documenting. So documenting, this meant that inside this one department, all the photographs that were inside the Institute, as well as any photographs ever gathered by activists until that point, were being sent in. Also, Jewish families from all over the world during the communist years sent in their photographs. So all of this was put together in one place, and it was supposed to be finally researched compared to what is left and what the photographs show, and also to recognize what is inside, what actually these photographs present. The other part of the documentation was that this place becoming a center, all of a sudden people started writing, what can I do, for Jewish cemeteries? Why is this synagogue so devastated? I want to do something in this and this town. How can I do it? Also, political activities started regarding Jewish cemeteries. So it was also the center for gathering all the bills and legislation that could help in preserving Jewish heritage. And also another thing that was gathered was absolutely any kind of document regarding Jewish heritage. And this was paper, newspaper cutouts, any kind of a leaflet, a map that showed anything. So this was the one part which later was to be transformed into an archive. The second part was that it became the center for knowledge. So the main aim was, if we are finding out all of these new information, we have to pass it on, because it could actually help preserve some of the recognized cemeteries, synagogues, or Jewish buildings. And it also became a place for connecting people. And this has been its greatest tradition, I would say, because it was the place that you could turn to, where you would get all the answers for all the questions, how to do something or what something means. Also, we always negotiated the best ways to preserving different landmarks. And of course, the third part of all of the actions was research. And research was conducted in archives, but it was also field research. It was that specialists working inside this department or cooperating with it, they went out into the Polish provinces and documented whatever was left. This is why we have a very, very large collection of documents from the 1990s especially. But going back to our field, and this is cemeteries, it is the truth that throughout all of the years that we've been working, cemeteries somehow had a very, very special position in the hearts and in the interests of the specialists working there. And here is why. First of all, they are beautiful. They were just simply amazing, beautiful places with old tombstones, the only remains of something old in many places in Poland. It was unknown symbolism and inscriptions on the tombstones, and they seemed worth documenting. So also people started learning Hebrew on their own to translate these inscriptions. And what came out was that, of course, tombstone inscriptions hold the most important information, and this is the information about the deceased, the Jewish deceased, which mainly in Poland were anonymous because all of the archives burned. Most of the Jews had perished during the Holocaust. So all of a sudden, the tombstone was seen and appreciated by the workers of the department as a unique historical document that we can get all this information out of. And another very important aspect was that the Jewish Historical Institute, although it being, of course, a governmental state institution, it has always been also a Jewish institution. And the decision was to always stand sort of on the guard of Jewish law and traditions, especially regarding cemeteries. And why is that? Because simply they are cemeteries and we have people who are buried there and their remains need to be protected. So very quickly, for example, in the 1990s, absolutely first conferences were organized for landmark preservation officers at that time, and they were educated the value and the meaning of a Jewish cemetery and how to inventory that cemetery. And also lectures about the halacha, so why the cemetery is so special, what status does it have in Judaism, and why should it be protected. And until today, we actually continue this tradition. We participate in the negotiations and we try to help people, especially local activists who really don't know where to start, connect them to other entities like Jewish communities, Jewish institutions, local governmental institutions, support their actions with even letters of recommendation, which might not seem a lot, but sometimes it really is important to get a letter of recommendation from, again, a state institution in this regard. And we help, for example, with finding the right forum for commemorating a Jewish cemetery so that the project does not interfere with the remains resting in certain spaces. We also help to write the inscriptions. Some persons who know Hebrew in the Institute translated into Hebrew. And the final task that I would like to mention here is because, of course, the changing times and people connecting online and so much information being online, we no longer collect so much all of the data, but we are now at a very important task of actually turning our great archive of absolutely thousands of documents, and I would say about 200,000 photographs, into a digitized archive. And this is something that we have just begun work on recently. And hopefully all of these documents will be at least partly available online, but they will be also protected and conservated. A very important last part of my answer regarding cemeteries. We have right now also began writing down inscriptions from historical documents and historical photographs of cemeteries, knowing that most of the tombstones no longer exist. So the photographs from the 1960s, 1990s are, again, they are the photographs of the only remaining document being the tombstone of someone's existence. So this is basically how it all evolved and how it's progressing right now.
Thank you very much. In the context of our subject, can you see any changes within the transformation from the communist era to democracy?
I can see mainly changes, but of course our institute initiating the work of our department was one of them, because the institute used to research mainly history of Jews before the war and also of the Holocaust, and our department researches contemporary life. But I think maybe this is a very good moment to explain what happened to Jewish cemeteries in Poland, so we understand the importance of the shift to democracy. I would like to show you a few photographs from our collections as well, maybe to explain the context a little better. So you see, the truth is that, of course, Jewish cemeteries, along with the Holocaust, they were destroyed in great numbers by Nazi German soldiers. And they have not only been destroyed in the context of using the tombstones for paving roads or building material, but also especially the research of last decades showed us that definitely most of the cemeteries were also spaces of execution during the war, and also mass burials. So the cemeteries after the war were left completely changed and damaged. Nevertheless, the communist years caught up with great destruction as well. The first problem was that, of course, as most of the property in Poland, and of course all of the property before belonging to the Jewish community, was taken over by the state. With time, the land that cemeteries was on was divided into smaller even parcels of land to different owners, and this made protection very, very difficult. Also, in the legislation of the 1950s and the 1960s enabled the destruction of cemeteries that were not used for a certain number of years. And this meant that, like, if you can imagine it, this happened on a Jewish cemetery, from schools, preschools, parks, industrial areas, roads, building sites with apartment buildings, as you can see here, even a gas station at a Jewish cemetery. All of this happened to these spaces. Also, cemeteries turning into grazing pastures. They completely blended, I would say, into the landscape of the Polish provinces. And also, again, more tombstones were used for building material. The soil was used as building material as well. And this destruction, it went on all throughout the communist years, because there was no one who could take care of it. There were some correspondence from the Jewish organizations asking in different particular cases not to destroy the cemeteries, but they usually weren't very successful. And this brings us to the turn of the 1970s and 1980s, when the political climate is starting to soften, we can say. And this brings on also a social change. This brings on a change that also after 1968, many more people find out about their Jewish roots. These underground universities start teaching about Hebrew, about Jewish culture and about Jewish history. People start learning Hebrew a little bit on their own. In the 1980s, the borders open up gradually. So also the American Jews come in, and they are the first to start teaching about Jewish culture. And who are they teaching? They are teaching more and more people who are finding out about their Jewish roots. And in this time, the search for also cemeteries goes on, the search for knowledge. More and more people start to specialize in the different fields in this topic. And along with the transformation in the 1990s, we already have a basis for quite a big change. And of course, the very big change is that we have even academic institutions now researching Jewish topics. This, of course, helps with our topic as well. But one of the main differences was enabling the Jewish communities to revive, meaning, and this is simplifying it greatly, but just simply recreating Jewish communities and institutions, and also creating Jewish organizations such as the Foundation for Preservation of Jewish Heritage, later on the Rabbinical Commission for Protection of Cemeteries, to actively take part in protecting cemeteries. This is, of course, also defined by a legislation act that came out in 1997, allowing Jewish communities to apply for restitution, meaning become owners again of their property. And of course, cemeteries being these spaces connected, of course, with the Jewish remains resting there, connected with the end of Jewish life, the Holocaust. They were, of course, the first ones that were brought to be retrieved. And it is, of course, customary for them to be owned by Jewish communities. So I would say that the greatest change in the transformation was once again letting in the Jewish side, or the representatives of Jewish institutions, to take part in the negotiations and in the discourse about preserving Jewish heritage in Poland.
Okay, I'll just say to our audience that we see that there are quite a few questions already, but we'll wait with it to the end of the lecture. We won't forget it, but we just want to do it in different order. So can we learn something about the changing in present Jewish life in Poland through visiting or seeing the cemeteries?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends where and how you look. But my experience has shown me that definitely, yes, you can. And I will refer to my research, which I did many years ago at a Jewish cemetery in Warsaw, the Okopowa Cemetery, so a place where we have over 150,000 burials. And I worked in a project where we were inventorying the cemetery, but at the same time, I was writing my master's about the revival of Jewish community in Poland. So I was putting somehow two and two together, going through these different sections. And at some point, we finally came to the section, the contemporary section, the post-war one. And this is the photo that you see on the right. These forms of tombstones are ones that you actually usually see at communal, secular cemeteries in Poland. So a very simple form, just with the text. The text was always just in Polish, no additional inscriptions, no Jewish symbols. And these were the sections from the 1950s, 60s, and even 1970s. They were like very plain, very simple. And this is the time when Jewish life in Poland was almost non-existent. Most Jews were either unaware of their roots or were somehow in hiding and were not speaking about their roots. And then comes the revival, which I mentioned. And this is another section that we finally went into to inventory it. And this is just one of the pictures that I took, but the picture on the right is of the new section at the Jewish cemetery, the contemporary burial section, where members of the Jewish community are buried today. And I have to say that it did strike me how amazingly eclectic this section was, because as I was conducting the ethnographic research and I was talking to people about their identity, how they found out about their roots and where are they going with them, each story was absolutely different, and each person had a very individual identity that was different from another person. And it very much, I think, can be seen exactly in this section where we have, as you can see, a menorah, a very forward, like new design. We have finally Magen David symbols coming in. We have inscriptions in Yiddish or even in Hebrew. Some religious symbols, a reference to a traditional matzeva. And this is something that I thought then, at least, that it's very interesting how this very various identity is expressed also in the burial rituals and in the ways that a tombstone is presented. So this was one of the things that I could see, the social changes within the cemetery. And the other aspect was, in my opinion, also very interesting, because as we started placing the information, the records from the inventory online, all of a sudden people started writing from Poland and from all over the world that first time ever they could see they could find the tombstones of their ancestors. And with very often a question, so what can I do about it? And in this great field of tombstones, of thousands and thousands of damaged and destroyed tombstones in very bad condition, all of a sudden these ones started to appear. The tombstones before the war were actually painted. They were always with color. And this was like, as you can see, one of them is glued back together and they are all painted over. Usually the surrounding area, traditionally in the cemetery, overgrown and unbearably difficult to get to, was cleaned. And even if these people couldn't come to Poland to take care of this by themselves, they finally could do something about it and have their part in preserving their own tombstones. So I think this in the very large area, these few individual tombstones that started to appear, that they were like encalced, they were again remembered, just showed us at least that it's not that it's a Jewish cemetery and that's it, there is nothing more, that there is a continuation, and so that there is a Jewish community out there that does something about it.
What activities have been made to commemorate ruined cemeteries?
A lot of activities have been made, but this has to be emphasized that your question about commemorating, it's of course very different from protecting. So I will, of course, tell you the story of how I see the commemorations happening in Poland, and also maybe the trend or why there is a focus on certain aspects. Commemoration of Jewish cemeteries in Poland actually started right after the war. The people who survived the Holocaust, in many cases, they came back to the towns that they came from. And as I told you, Jewish cemeteries were places of execution, of death as well from the war. And you see, the people who came back, they knew the direct story of what happened in a certain town. They knew exactly where the graves were, and they knew also how many people or who is buried in individual graves. And they commemorated these graves. And as you can see, this is Białystok. This is one of the grandest commemorations of the victims of the Holocaust. But even in a smaller town, you can see the grandness of a monument being erected in the cemetery. The main function of those commemorations were that they actually marked the mass graves, the graves that we are searching for today, because we don't know where they are. The information was directed at the descendants, so it was in Polish, but also in Yiddish. and it did tell the exact number of persons who died. And this was very important, especially following the communist years, where many of the historical and political discourse distorted some of the information. And as you see, the photo next to it is a monument rebuilt in the same place many years later, because unfortunately, in many cases, right after the Jewish delegations left Poland, in many cases these grand commemorations were destroyed. And again, throughout the decades until practically 1980s, 1990s, this was it, and not really many monuments were constructed. In the 1986, this is a photo, but this was already a period of time where many activists, as I mentioned, were working on Jewish cemeteries. And again, I already mentioned that there was a very grand value put on tombstones as the last tangible remains of Jewish culture. So for many years, Jewish tombstones were retrieved, collected back, gathered from local spaces, and there was a name to protect them. So what can we do if there is just a cemetery there and we need to erect a monument? How to go about it? The borders and the boundaries of the cemetery are unclear. So yes, we go into a symbolic monument that has to, in my understanding, have all the function. It has to mark the cemetery, the remaining fragment of the cemetery. It has to have the information about what happened in a certain town. It has to commemorate the Jewish community. Usually also it commemorated the Shoah. And it brought us to a situation where in Poland we can really find unbelievable shapes of what we call a lapidarium, which is a monument built from certain remains, in order also to protect and preserve these tombstones. And again, this is something that, of course, it's amazing that it was done. It was done with great effort. But once more and more the Jewish community and, for example, the Rabbinical Commission became involved, and also our institute, we started researching the individual histories of the Second World War, of the Holocaust, that it's not just a destroyed cemetery, that we can actually, by going into the archives, by researching local archives, by talking to local people, that we can retrieve some of the information to find out something about the people actually buried there in these places. And although these two photos that I am showing you, they are from graves outside of cemeteries, although I thought that they're very interesting examples, this is why I'm showing them to you. This is how strong right now the aim is to commemorate a Jewish community, but with a great emphasis on finding out the names to bring back the memory of the individuals. And so on the right, the translation for this very humble sign is, this is a grave of an unknown Jewish tailor shot by the Germans in 1942 or 1943. May his soul be bound in the bounds of life. This is the closest we could get, but we thought that maybe somebody will one time say that their grandfather, their great-grandfather or a member of their family were a tailor and maybe perished in this and this year, so we leave no information out. And on the left, there is another grave that in the back you can see this whole pile of stones being thrown in one place. Well, this is actually another change that is being done again, and this is to mark and protect the bodies of the deceased, of the remains. and the memorial tombstone that has been also erected, it doesn't even sometimes have surnames. It just has any names that we could find. And again, this is an idea to let the commemoration, of course, correspond with the descendants. And this is why today we translate all the Polish inscriptions into Hebrew. So of course, people who are Jewish and come to Poland can actually read this kind of a commemoration. So these are the two trends, but all of this is actually very difficult for example, local activists who want to do something to do by themselves, to come up with a form. How should a Jewish cemetery be commemorated? And for years, we, as the Jewish Historical Institute, also we participated in these negotiations and discussions, how a Jewish cemetery should be protected, but then how should it be marked if it cannot be protected? And a solution was found with this one sign that was initiated by the National Institute of Heritage, to just give an option of this kind of a mark that you can put anywhere, even if there are no funds, on a wall, on remaining wall of a cemetery, or on just brought in some kind of a monument or a stone, to mark these cemeteries in a easy way. And also this is supposed to be a kind of an information that, you know, the higher power, the governmental power, is also taking these cemeteries into consideration as national landmarks. So this was the main idea, and we will of course see how this idea comes out. So far, from everything that I see in my work, there is still great emphasis on finding the names of the individual persons buried in different cemeteries.
Okay, I'll start to combine questions from the audience with my questions, because under the same subject. So can you characterize the people and the organization who put efforts on these subjects of a Jewish cemetery? And also someone asked that she knows that there are Poles volunteering in preservation activities of the cemeteries and other places related to Jewish history in Poland. And can you elaborate about this activity and its influence on local population, if any?
If any. Okay, so I'll start maybe with the characterizing the people who take part in these projects, and I'll write down the influence so I don't forget. So first of all, from my experience, one of the main actors and the most important people to be appreciated are the local activists, because it very, very often, in so many cases, starts from them, that they see that something is happening, or that for some reason they want to work in the Jewish cemetery or teach about the Jewish cemetery, and they undertake an action to do something about it. It's not always commemoration, it's sometimes education or cleaning the cemetery. These people are very often, for example, teachers. They work in different cultural institutions in their local towns. Very often they are an entity among a greater majority, actually. So it's not usual that a whole community says, let's do something about a Jewish cemetery that we live next to. It starts from one person who engages others, very often pupils, their students, schools, and so on. And this, I think, would go the same when we talk about local governmental offices. I've noticed that also usually something is done by those representatives when it comes from an individual, that this is his will to do it. The motivations are usually they are idealistic, one could say. Also, of course, the great partner are the Jewish communities and the Jewish organizations or the owners of the land that the Jewish cemetery is on. Practically no inauguration should be done without the Rabbinical Commission for Cemeteries, who stand on the guard of protecting the remains. Also, there are many larger NGOs in Poland that are interested in Jewish culture. And this is, for example, right now, a more active one, Foundation for National Heritage. There is the Foundation for Forum for Dialogue Among the Nations. Of course, our institute participates as much as we can. And also recently, the National Institute of Heritage is gathering information from local archives to create a data about cemeteries. This actions within local spaces, how they influence the community. Well, this very much, first of all, of course, depends on the community, but this depends on how we carry out these actions. And this means that throughout many years of experience for me and also for many of my colleagues that I worked with, it shows that you have to work with the community on every level. So, for example, if we are planning to build a monument, let's involve the local craftsmen. Then they will feel that this was done by their own hands, that this is also their own somehow tangible heritage. If we are having an opening, unveiling ceremony, we have to invite the youth, the local governmental representatives, the priest as well, to say a few words. So the influence will only be seen by the efforts put into all of this work. But I would say that the great question is the maintenance of the Jewish cemeteries after these actions are done. And this is one of the hardest questions, because it involves like constant contact and constant education activities, which of course will depend on how the cemetery is treated within a local area.
Okay.
I would just one more thing. Also, of course, it very often depends on the charisma, I would say, and the likability even of the local activist, how much he is able to do and pursue within local governments. So they also take these spaces under protection.
Okay, I think I'll stop for a second with my questions, since there are many questions from the audience, and I would like to give them the opportunity. So maybe we'll start with a short one. Is there a map or a list of the graves in Kiehl cemetery? You know what?
Is there a map? I would have to check the database, but this is something that is very much doable to, there are many databases. So if that person contacts me later on, I can check whatever there's done in the cemetery.
Okay, there is it's a bit long question. It is said that there are 1,200 neglected Jewish cemeteries in Poland, and most of them in places where there is no community left. In some places, there are no tombstones left, and all that is required is to fence the area. A few places are like Częstochowa, where there are about 5,000 tombstones, but no one takes responsibility. The municipality says it is not our responsibility, and the Jewish community in Katowice said the same. So who is responsible? Why does the Polish government or local authorities not take responsibility for the cemeteries in their territory? I don't know if you know to answer this question, but maybe you can address it.
Yes, it's a very good question, and it's a very frequent question, and it's a very difficult question to answer because we have all been approached that, like, why isn't anybody doing anything? And the truth is that it is a process that is happening for years to figure out a way how to protect Jewish burial grounds in Poland. Even the number, the 1,200 that was mentioned, this is the correct number, but it would be maybe hard to believe this is a number that has just recently even been established. I mentioned earlier that the destruction that happened during the communist years, and I mentioned that many of the Jewish cemeteries were divided into with time into plots of land owned by different owners. This is municipality, this is the state, this is sometimes even private owners. These are spaces which have been already built on, meaning that if we have a school somewhere or a road, all we can now think about is how to figure out a way to bring the Polish legislation to accept the Jewish tradition of not touching and not moving Jewish remains. So I can say this, the responsibility in one extent has been taken by some Jewish organizations who are fighting as much as they can to preserve the remains, because if we cannot preserve everything, but the remains, the bodies of the deceased are the most important ones. They are being, I would say, led to speak by, they are invited to all the negotiations, but in absolutely every single one of those cemeteries, and this is a large number, the solution is different due to what happened in that one area that we're talking about. The fencing, yes, the fencing happened, the fencing of the cemeteries happened in many areas in Poland, but in most cases, this is actually a fencing of a symbolic area. And we asked the question, what about the rest? There was an idea, and this is very much connected to the aspect of the Jewish activity that I was talking about, of finding Jewish war graves, because the Polish state, it does take care of the victims of the graves of the victims of the Second World War. So there was, for example, an idea to maybe incorporate that. But I would say that on smaller local levels, there are a lot of people trying to take responsibility and still negotiating. But yes, the truth is that it is happening one by one. Nevertheless, the negotiations that I mentioned, even with the Jewish organizations, the governmental organizations, and our institute as a mediator in some way, we have figured out the priority. And for example, the priority is that we have now the number, the 1,200. This is a list that is being now created, gathering all the information about all the owners. We will finally have a list, and we will know that a certain cemetery belongs to a certain entity, and we can actually turn to them. Finally, we know who to turn to take care of a certain cemetery. So hopefully it is still a process, but of course, we also have this saying among us that still it very much depends on a goodwill of people.
Okay. Does anything done with regard to mass graves, for example, in the Okopowa Cemetery in Warsaw?
What a good and current question. Actually, there is now work being done in the Okopowa Cemetery, and there are projects and there are negotiations how in the best way renew the monument that is there, we suspect that there might be more than one mass grave within the Okopowa cemetery, but there is one that is definitely recognized, and work has just started. Our institute actually also is participating a little bit in finding out some historical information and discussing the form. So yes, I think that will be done very soon. It's done by the Jewish community and the Foundation for National Heritage, and they are working on a project to honor this place in the best way possible.
Can you tell about one or two examples of projects of renovation or preservation of cemeteries, and what is the process of such as projects?
What is the process? Maybe I will start. With answering that question, and then I'll move on to the example. Maybe this will be a little easier. So the process, it has already been mentioned a little bit, but of course it will incorporate all the things that we have so far talked about. And this is starting with the research, finding out the historical boundaries, finding out who the owner is. This has until recently been quite complicated in many cases. Of course, starting from this point that depending on who the cemetery belongs to, we have to include this entity as our partner. So then getting the right permissions to even either fence a cemetery, this isn't always necessary, or to build a monument. This is the most common action taken. And of course, a great difficulty is finding financial partners, but people who initiate these actions are often local NGOs or local activists, or sometimes they are descendants of Jews from a certain town. So this is where the process of connecting partners happens. So looking for funds and working with the Jewish community. So, you know, everything is kosher, I would say, with the rabbinical commission. So nothing is done in a wrong way. Looking for historical facts about the Jewish cemetery. It's sometimes very often to establish what happened to the Jewish cemetery after the war, like how was it parceled into parts. And then, of course, deciding on the form of the monument. It cannot be something that interferes with the ground, with the soil, with the remains. It has to be something that, of course, the inscriptions are the truth, that they are meaningful. So they are the actual text of memory within this local space. So all the people are working together on this. And then again, I said, finding local craftsmen and getting the community involved as much as possible, inviting, as I said, everyone to the unveiling of a monument. And then comes, of course, the cleaning and the education activities that should go along with it, for example, in schools. And then the hardest one of all is the maintenance. And I think that maybe, because I already told you a little bit about the process, I will now tell you about the maintenance on one example. And this example to me is quite interesting because the cemetery went through everything that we have talked about. It was partially destroyed during the war, then in a greater extent after the Second World War. And this cemetery is the second cemetery in Warsaw, on the other side of the river, if anybody knows Warsaw, in a bit of a difficult district surrounding it. And you see, in the 1980s, there were great plans to do exactly what I already said, that a Jewish organization, the Nissenbaum Foundation, in cooperation with different activists, they decided to commemorate this cemetery and to protect it. And also they had to deal with the fact that many of the tombstones were taken from the Jewish cemetery and used as building material. And in the 1980s, as you see, a grand, beautiful entry gate was built with a monument inside. Some of the tombstones were re-erected as to show that there is a cemetery inside. But most of the cemetery looks exactly like this. This is thousands and thousands and thousands of tombstones just lying there like sort of the domino place. And now comes the maintenance. In the last decade, the Jewish community was able to retrieve this cemetery, and it is now owned by them. But again, this isn't actually, they weren't able to get back the whole area of the cemetery. The fenced area is actually only a part of the area where the tombstones are. The cemetery was much larger, but at this point it's been destroyed. It's a parking place or a road, or there are installations inside the ground. So the Jewish community, after getting this cemetery back, thought, what can we actually do to maintain it? There were also, the fence was being destroyed. People went inside to, drink alcohol because nobody will see them there. They were destroying some of the tombstones, a lot of vandalism. And so recently, that's someone knocking on my door, but never mind. But recently, actually, the Jewish community took upon itself to sort of try at least to have an idea for maintaining the grounds. So as you see, they have to deal with the constantly growing shrubbery and greenery. They have to, seeing that this is one of the most important things to do, document the tombstones, because within these tombstones we have the missing genealogical link of Warsaw Jewry in the number of thousands. Imagine how much information is there. So they are trying to inventory it. As you can see, it is not easy. They are trying to, by thinking of different ways of commemorating it, they have to keep on searching for the exact places where burials were held. So this is what you see on the right. With a georadar, there are non-invasive research is being done. They also have to figure out what to do with all these little pieces of tombstones retrieved from the constructions that I showed you before, how to maintain the existing beautiful tombstones in good condition. And finally of all, and this is like the last step of something that we hope that one day will happen in most of the cemeteries in Poland, all the area in the right photograph that you see is the land that was finally acknowledged also as a Jewish cemetery. It has also always been a cemetery. It has been fenced, and there has been some bushes planted because it's very easy to get over a fence, so that nobody walks their dogs anymore on someone's burials. That there were archaeological excavations done here in a very delicate manner to confirm that definitely this is still a cemetery, and it was confirmed that it is. So all of this gradually, but you see, started in the 1980s, and today it's 40 years later. All of this is gradually being done by the Jewish community in Warsaw, which is one of the more active Jewish communities when it comes to being able to maintain their cemeteries. So this is the process, and as you can see, it's not easy going between the most important, preserving the remains, and on the other hand, taking care of the tangible, beautiful tombstones, which are incredibly also expensive to renovate.
Well, we have already lost the time. But maybe it's important for our audience to know which databases are available for people who would like to search their relatives or want to learn more about the cemeteries and the Jewish community that related to different cemeteries, because there are also quite a lot of questions that refer to very specific information. Maybe it can be helpful for people to know.
Okay, so very quickly, especially for English speakers, I think the Jewish Record Index in Poland is the most important database simply because it has in the recent years incorporated other databases, and also it gives access, or it sends off to a certain selection of records in local archives. So this is the best place to start with, and it will of course refer to different ones. And of course, if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them also. So on our website, there is an email to our department. Also inside our institute, we have a genealogy department who also helps in various searches when it comes to family genealogy.
Okay, maybe we have 2 minutes for, there is a question that repeat from different people.
Oh, I don't see them. I don't know why.
There is, what about FODZ? Do you cooperate with this organization? Why?
What's the second part of the question?
Yeah, there is also questions about it. Why in 1 hour plus have you? Okay, so many questions about FODZ. Do you cooperate?
I'll answer this one. Well, of course, it's a very important organization, so some cooperations has always been present, but I am actually the director of our institute, used to be the director of this foundation. So, so yes, we know of the work, and
okay. So you do cooperate with them actually.
I think that at this point, this foundation is one of the organizations also responsible for the restitution of Jewish cemeteries, and it works on cemeteries that they are the owner with. So they are also helping the local activists, or cooperating with them, or commemorating the cemeteries that they are working on.
Okay, let's maybe one last question. There are many, so I have to pick. I'm sorry for all the questions we won't answer. There is also about a question about if you cooperate with the U.S. Commission for Preservation of American Heritage, if they play a role in this all projects, and also about a German organization that active in Ukraine to restore lost cemeteries. Do you know about it, and do you?
I do know about all these projects, and I do know about these organizations, although in the last few years there has been no need for cooperation as such. I think maybe they're also the people that people turn to in order to get information, just like they turn to us.
Okay, well, we really ran out of time, so thank you very much. I would like to first thank our audience for attending this sixth and last event of this series. Thank you, Alicja Mroczkowska, and thank you to all the partners who work for this project, the educational team of Moreshet, Mordechai Anielewicz Memorial Education and Research Center, and especially to Tom Fried, to the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, and especially to Julia Mackiewicz, and of course, to the Emanuel Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute and Magdalena Szyszkowska. So thank you very much to you all. And thank you again, Alicja.
Thank you, and thank you for all
evening.
the questions.
Good evening, and keep safe.